La All New 2026 RAV4 GR Sport con un diseño lleno de estilo. Toyota no se hace responsable si tus compañeros de trabajo necesitan un auto nuevo después de ver tu RAV4 GR Sport o si recibes demasiados elogios. Un estilo así de potente gira cabezas y curvas, úsalo con responsabilidad. La 2026 RAV4 es serious fun.
As we approached Rio de Janeiro Plaza, our attention was drawn to that statue in the center of the park, a replica of Michelangelo's David. But there was something more. A woman hanging from the top of it, leaning out toward us and smiling, as if she were playing some kind of game, and there was something very strange about her, almost as if she weren't a real person. Many of our listeners from Mexico City and the surrounding area, and really, practically anyone visiting from outside, from elsewhere in the Mexican Republic or from other countries who come to this city, have passed through one of its most traditional and touristy neighborhoods, the legendary Colonia Roma, where you'll find old mansions, restaurants, bars, lonely streets too, and mythic parks like Rio de Janeiro, right at the foot of the House of the Witches. Tonight we begin with stories that tell us what you might encounter in this place once no one is left walking its streets, some of which seem to never stop moving, while others seem frozen in time. This episode is dedicated to everyone who has walked through there, especially those who have to do it constantly. It's time to forget everything for a little while. It's time to begin an episode of Tales of the Night. I was never one for going out partying until those days. At night, leaving work always after 10, sometimes even later, I had to walk to Glorieta de Insurgentes to catch the metro and start the long ride home. There were people who told me to be careful given the hour, but honestly I felt pretty calm walking around there, especially being used to my own neighborhood. If that didn't scare me, a fancy little neighborhood like that one wasn't going to either. But you know what? La Roma has something very particular once night falls. During the day there's always a lot of activity. Everyone knows that. People walking their dogs, tourists taking photos, people going in and out of cafés or restaurants, plus everyone walking through on their way to work. But after a certain hour, some of the streets, the ones that aren't main roads, where there's nothing open, turn into something completely different. They're still pretty, still lit up, but they feel empty in a way that's hard to explain. I used to go up Jalapa. It was the route I'd learned during my first weeks at the job. I'd walk several blocks until I reached the Glorieta de Insurgentes, and from there take the metro back to Iztapalapa. After a few days, I could do it almost without thinking. Always the same path. The night this happened, I had left a little later than usual. I don't remember the exact time, but it must have been past 11:30, because I remember wondering what I'd do if I missed the metro. Jalapa looked much emptier than normal. No cars, no people, not even music coming from anywhere, no one walking their dogs. It was one of those nights where it seemed like the whole street had decided to stay home. I was walking quickly when I saw something further ahead, near one of the sidewalks. At first I thought it was someone waiting for something. Then I thought maybe it was someone experiencing homelessness, judging by how they were dressed. As I got closer, I could make out that whoever it was looked very thin. From the build, I would have said it was a young man. He was sitting on the curb with his feet toward the street, next to a parked car, knees pulled up and wrapped in his arms, head resting between them, as if he were asleep or crying. I thought something was wrong. I genuinely felt like I needed to be careful. I don't know if this happens to you, but when you walk alone at night a lot, you develop certain instincts. Some people just catch your attention because something's off about them, and there was something very off about this guy. I kept walking, watching for any movement. I remember I even drifted slightly toward the far edge of the sidewalk to avoid passing too close to him. But when I was practically right next to him, I heard a voice, a low voice, as if he could barely speak. "Hey, do you know where I can catch a taxi?" When I heard it, I stopped out of reflex. The question caught me completely off guard. For some reason, I'd been expecting anything else. Someone asking for money, even a threat, even someone asking for help. But not that. The strange part was that while he spoke, he didn't lift his head, didn't move, didn't even seem to look at me. But I heard the question very clearly. I immediately remembered that one street over, on Durango, there was a taxi stand that operated all night, so I answered, "Yes, straight ahead. Walk a bit, and you'll find them." "Thanks." That was it. I kept walking, but after a few steps I felt the need to look back. I couldn't really explain why. Maybe because the whole scene had felt strange. Maybe because I wanted to make sure it had actually happened. I turned around, and that's when something I saw sent a chill through me. The guy was still exactly where he'd been. The only thing that had changed was the position of his head, because now it was raised, turning toward me. It was several meters away, a considerable distance, and it was dark, so I couldn't make out his face clearly. But I do remember his eyes. They seemed to reflect light. They glinted with a tiny point of brightness. I felt an unpleasant twist in my stomach, like some internal alarm telling me to run, telling me I was in danger. I picked up my pace even more. A few meters ahead there was a corner store, one of those that are everywhere, and I ducked inside. I didn't want to be out on the street. I needed to be around more people. I went in and asked for a pack of cigarettes I didn't even plan on smoking. There was a young guy working there and a girl stocking shelves. I must have looked bad, because both of them asked if I was okay. I told them yes, that I was probably overreacting, but that I just had a scare. And then I told them what had just happened to me. When I finished, the guy stopped what he was doing, stepped outside and asked me where I had seen him. I pointed in the direction. We looked at the sidewalk and there was no one there. No trace of the guy. The street was completely empty. I remember the employee stood there looking for several seconds before saying something that made me feel much worse. "Get back inside quickly, please." We went back in. The girl was watching us from the register. She looked nervous, but somewhere between nervous and excited. The guy told me this was the 4th time someone had reported this. People had told them they'd seen him before. His coworker had had it happen to her once, when she was alone. When I heard that, I thought they were joking, but they weren't. He explained that during the months he'd been working there, people had already come in shaken, telling similar stories. Always someone sitting with their head between their arms, always appearing in the same spot, always asking the same question. Where can I catch a taxi? Sometimes people said that when they turned around he was gone. Other times they swore they'd seen him standing several meters ahead, even though no one had seen him actually walk there, already near the taxi stand. The girl said that once a girl came in even more frightened than I was, practically running through the door. As it happened, that night there was a regular customer in the store, an older man who worked in some nearby buildings. When he heard what the girl had seen, he made a comment that unsettled everyone even more. According to him, this had been happening for many years. He said it was the ghost of a young man who had died trying to find a taxi while injured, somewhere in that area, and the description was always the same one given by everyone who saw him. Sitting with his arms around his knees, head sunk between them, crouched, waiting, asking about taxis. The man said it was said that if you ignored him and didn't tell him where he could catch a taxi, he would get up and follow you. None of the kids working at the store had seen him themselves, but they wanted to know if it was true. I paid for my cigarettes and stayed there a few more minutes, until it became too uncomfortable to keep standing around. When I finally left, I ran the remaining blocks to Insurgentes. Since then, I stopped walking down Jalapa. Even today, after all these years, I still remember exactly where it happened. I could point out the precise spot where he was sitting if I were standing there. So be careful if you ever have to walk down Jalapa in Colonia Roma, and if someone asks you something, answer.
The all-new 2026 RAV4 GR Sport with a stylish design. Toyota RAV4 is not responsible if your coworker suddenly needs a new car after seeing your RAV4 GR Sport or if you receive excessive compliments. Style that's powerful, turn heads, and corners, you're responsible. The 2026 RAV4 is serious fun.
Hello, community. My name is Gwendolyn. I'm Colombian, from Bogota, and I've been listening to Tales of the Night since before moving to Mexico. In fact, One of the things I was most excited about when I moved to Mexico City was getting to know some of the places I'd heard mentioned so many times in stories on the show, and one of those places was Colonia Roma. I loved going out around there with my friends, also around Colonia Condesa. I suppose because when you arrive from another country, you get that curiosity to discover the places everyone talks about. What I'm about to tell you happened during my first months living here. One of my best friends rented an apartment across Avenida Cuauhtémoc, not exactly in La Roma, but very close, just across one street. And she had told me several times that if I ever went out late, I could stay with her instead of going all the way back to Iztacalco alone. I never imagined that the first time I took her up on that offer, something so strange would happen. That night I had gone out with a few friends to a bar on Álvaro Obregón. There were a lot of people, and I think about half of us were foreigners, not at all unusual in that part of the city. At some point we joined up with another group of foreigners, and I especially remember a guy who started talking to me. He didn't seem like a bad person. He was actually quite friendly, even seemed a little naive. I won't mention which country he was from because I don't want to feed into stereotypes. I'll just say he wasn't from Mexico or Colombia. At some point when I told him I was leaving, he went to the bar and brought me back a cocktail. It didn't seem strange to me, and I didn't notice any suspicious taste. But from the very first sip I had a very unpleasant feeling, like something inside you going on alert. I took a second sip to make sure I wasn't imagining it, and the feeling continued. So I decided to leave the drink without him noticing, made up some excuse, said goodbye to my friends, and texted my friend to ask if I could still stay at her place. She answered almost immediately. "Of course, come over." While the guy went to get himself another cocktail, I left without saying anything and started walking. Despite the hour, Álvaro Obregón still had some activity, but as I walked, I started feeling uncomfortable, a strange sensation that made me feel like I needed to run to my friend's apartment, like someone was behind me. I walked along the median path in the middle of the avenue, looked back, saw no one, kept walking, looked back again. Nothing. I thought maybe the alcohol was making me paranoid, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger. When I got close to Avenida Cuauhtémoc, I decided to change the route I would normally have taken. I figured that if someone really was following me, a sudden change might help me notice, or throw them off. So I turned onto a smaller street, much quieter. The lights were still on, but the difference from Álvaro Obregón was enormous. No restaurants, no people, no noise here. Just buildings, closed-up houses, a few lit windows. I remember that was the moment something strange happened, something I wasn't expecting. Halfway down the block, a heavy old gate swung open, one that seemed to belong to a much older building than anything around it. And a woman stepped out, dressed entirely in black, a shawl covering her head. I could barely make out part of her face. She looked at me as if she had been waiting for me, then turned her gaze toward the street I had just come from and said, "This way." I remember those words perfectly, because under any other circumstance I would have just kept walking and ignored her. But that night I felt very vulnerable, and when the woman glanced back again toward the street behind me, I got the feeling she was looking at something there, something behind me. So I followed her, and we went in. The first thing I noticed was that it was an old-style vecindad, a long open-air corridor with high-ceilinged apartments on either side, peeling paint, broken floor tiles. It was very dark, but there was light coming from the far end. The woman walked toward it, and I followed. I didn't know what I was doing or why I was following her, but I was certain of one thing. I didn't want to be alone on the street. When we reached the end of the corridor, I saw that the light was coming from an open apartment. Inside there were several women, all dressed in black, all with shawls too, sitting around a table covered in candles. They were speaking quietly. I couldn't make out what they were saying. But when I crossed the threshold, they all fell silent at exactly the same moment. All of them, and turned to look at me. I couldn't make out their faces. The candlelight barely illuminated parts of them. But I clearly remember the feeling of having interrupted something. And no one seemed surprised to see me. That was the strange part. as if they already knew I would arrive. The woman who had brought me went in to join them. I stayed near the entrance, not sure whether I should leave or stay. That's when I noticed a smell that irritated my nose, like incense mixed with dampness, something old. I needed to step out for some air. I looked back toward the corridor and saw someone arriving. A man, slowly making his way in from the street, leaning on a crutch. He was missing a leg. I remember clearly the way he walked. Slow, dragging his body slightly, and especially the sound every time the wooden crutch struck the floor. He came a few steps closer, then stopped, just looking at me, as if he were the one surprised to see me. I felt the need to get out of there. I thanked the women. I don't remember if anyone answered, and started walking toward the street. As I passed beside the man, he tried to grab me. I saw him reach toward me, but I dodged him and ran out into the street. When I finally got out of that place, I felt enormous relief, but also a strange emptiness in my stomach. I picked the route back to my friend's apartment again, this time without stopping, without looking back, thinking only about getting there. I arrived a few minutes later, crossed into the small garden in front of the building, closing the metal gate behind me. There I looked up across the street toward the park, and among the trees there was a person watching me. Even at that distance I recognized him. It was the foreign guy who had bought me the cocktail. I turned around and ran, went into the building and the elevator. As soon as I got in, I told my friend everything, about the guy from the bar, about the woman, about the vecindad, the people praying. She listened to all of it, and at the end said something I hadn't considered. That maybe the woman had noticed someone was following me, and that's why she'd brought me inside, even though it interrupted something private. The idea didn't seem absurd to me. It actually calmed me down a little. The next day, as we were getting ready for breakfast, my friend suggested we go find the woman first, to ask her what she had seen and thank her, bring her something, anything. So we went to that street. I found the spot right away. Well, almost. The two houses on either side of the vecindad were there, normal, just like the night before. But the vecindad itself wasn't. We walked the whole block in case I'd misremembered, but the vecindad simply didn't exist. And when I went back to where I remembered it, I realized I wasn't mistaken. It had been right there. That was exactly where it had been the night before. And yet in that spot there was something else entirely. Something that didn't match at all with what I remembered having walked through the night before. That's when my friend started getting nervous too. So did I, honestly. So we stopped looking and didn't ask anyone anything. We never really talked about it much again. For years it stayed as something we only shared between the two of us, a strange experience neither of us knew how to explain. Now I feel like I'll never know what happened, who the woman who let me in was, or who the people inside were. Nor do I know whether they really protected me from something, or whether something worse was waiting for me in there.
La All New 2026 RAV4 Limited con Panoramic Moonroof. Toyota no se hace responsable del nuevo peinado exótico que vas a traer si te acostumbras a manejar la RAV4 Limited con el Panoramic Moonroof y las ventanas abiertas. Te recomendamos llevar hairspray si quieres mantener el look. La 2026 RAV4 es serious fun.
Good evening, everyone. I'm about to move to Mexico City to study, and I've been thinking a lot about something that happened to me 4 years ago. I'm from Monterrey, and during a vacation, my cousin and I went to spend a few days in Mexico City with some relatives who live in San Miguel Chapultepec, almost overlooking the forest. My cousin and I were both into horror stories, the kind of teenagers who spend all their time watching ghost videos on YouTube and looking for any excuse to scare themselves. So when we came across stories and legends about the House of the Witches, we became obsessed with seeing it. Our aunt and uncle took us one afternoon to see La Roma, and we passed through Rio de Janeiro Park. I remember perfectly the fountain with the David replica in the center and the House of the Witches building in the background. My uncle even told us a few legends about the place, though mostly in a joking tone. That night my cousin and I kept talking about it, and you know how those ideas get when you're that age. Someone says something like, "We should go at dawn and see what it looks like." And suddenly it seems like a brilliant idea. We waited until everyone was asleep, slipped out of the house quietly, and took our aunt and uncle's bicycles. I still remember how different the city looked at that hour, how amazing it felt riding through it like that, feeling the cold air on my face. There were still some cars on the Circuito interior, but as soon as we entered Condesa, there was no movement at all. We rode through until we reached La Roma, and finally the park. I don't remember the name of the street we were approaching on, but I got excited seeing the park up ahead as we got closer. It was very dark. That's when my cousin asked me, "Is there someone at the fountain?" I looked over, and yes, there was something. It looked like someone was clinging to the statue's head, peeking out from one side, then the other, as if hiding from us, appearing on one side of the David, then the other, as if peering out to look at us. We kept pedaling and stopped at the entrance to the park. I remember we even joked, saying maybe someone was spray painting graffiti, or that they were going to cut off the statue's head, like in that old Simpsons episode. I don't know why, but we got off the bikes and kept approaching on foot. It was a woman. She peeked out again, first from one side, then the other. She was laughing, as if she were playing some kind of game with us. And then something happened that made us stop in our tracks. We realized her feet weren't resting on anything, that she wasn't holding on to the back of the statue. That woman, completely. She was suspended in midair. The distance was still considerable, but we could make her out better now. Her skin was extremely pale, her hair very dark, as was her dress, with wide shoulder pads, the kind you see in old movies. She kept poking her head out on one side of the David and then the other, never taking her eyes off us. My cousin was the first one to say it, the first one to dare say it. "She's floating." That was my confirmation. Him saying it meant it was real, meant he was seeing the same thing I was. As soon as he said it, the woman peeked out again, smiling with a crazed expression, and we took off running back the way we had come. We got on the bikes and pedaled as hard as we could, not daring to look back. We got back to our aunt and uncle's house and went in quietly, each of us heading straight to our own room without saying a word. You know what's strangest of all? Sometime later we came across something describing exactly what we had seen, but it wasn't a true story, an experience, an account. It was a creepypasta, something presented as fiction. My cousin and I still talk about this from time to time. We've never managed to find an explanation that satisfies us. All we know is that we snuck out to see the House of the Witches and ended up with the most terrifying experience of our lives. I haven't been back to that park since it happened, but I imagine now that I'll be living there, it'll be hard to avoid. Has anyone seen anything there? Something similar? Or knows this story? Thank you for listening. Have a very good night.
La All New 2026 RAV4 GR Sport, con un diseño lleno de estilo. Toyota no se hace responsable si tus compañeros de trabajo necesitan un auto nuevo después de ver tu RAV4 GR Sport o si recibes demasiados elogios. Un estilo así de potente gira cabezas y curvas, úsalo con responsabilidad. La 2026 RAV4 es serious fun.